So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I'm on today, and it's the land of the Darawal people. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I really believe that we have so much to learn from our traditional custodians and how they formed relationships, not only with each other, but with the land. So it feels really beautiful to be able to host this chat tonight. And for those that don't know me, my name is Mary Hoang. I am the founder and head psychologist of the Indigo Project. And it is a real pleasure, and I feel very humbled to be here tonight because it's been a long time. I feel that we've had a live event with such an incredible following and registration for tonight. I think that we've all been feeling a little bit disconnected from each other, and we would love to be able to have some face-to-face events this year if all goes well. But it's nice to see that there are people from all around Australia tuning in, as well as New South Wales, and that we can actually open up that access for all people. For those that don't know about the Indigo Project, we are a progressive online therapy organization, and we do lots of beautiful and weird and wacky things in the space of helping people to get their shit together, deal with their emotions and relationships. And we also sort of venture into the art and music kind of world as well, to help people to learn about all sorts of different topics and things that are really difficult, like also death and forgiveness and grief and loss. So we're definitely not afraid to have difficult conversations about tough things. And we really believe that, we wanted to give back through this festival, because we know that it's been a really challenging time for people all around the world. We wanted to make it accessible and free. And we just really wanted to offer that space where hopefully, we'll be able to give you a sense that you can build connected and authentic relationships, whether you're in a relationship or whether you're single, whether you're, wanting to leap in or terrified about relationships. I think this conversation really applies. I think you'll get things out of it that you can apply to romantic relationships, but at the heart of it, I think that you'll be able to apply across really all relationships. And I'd like to introduce two of the incredible therapists from the Indigo Project. We have Katie O'Donoghue, who is a relationships and inner child coach. And her mission is to help people on a pathway to self-love and self-compassion. And then we also have the amazing Amanda Hallam, who comes to us as our resident couples counselor, who's really about helping people to build authentic and connected relationships. And what I really love about these two women is that they really want to help people and couples and individuals get to the root and the heart of why we find ourselves so messy in relationships, why it's so hard, why it hurts, and how ultimately it can be fulfilling. So when we were talking about, the things that we wanted to chat about today, we decided that we wanted to circle around this idea of happily ever after, and the myths, the expectations that we have, on relationships. And it's a pretty juicy topic. So please, as I said, if you have any burning questions, please let us know. And I think we're going to dive straight into it. So first of all, I'd really like to introduce my therapists and get them to give us a little bit of insight into why they decided to choose the path that they did. For example, Katie, why relationships coaching? Relationships aren't easy, even though they said the science is that, good relationships are the backbone to happiness in life, but they also can be really soul destroying and difficult at times too. So why are you passionate about this area? And can you let us know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for the introduction. And it's nice to meet everyone. Hello. But I became really passionate about becoming a relationship coach and helping people to improve their relationships, partially due to my own personal background. It's always been quite challenging in terms of familial relationships, primarily. And then having my own challenges on the dating scene, rejecting the nice guys, not able to accept a healthy love, not really knowing how to connect with people, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I didn't know how to connect with myself. I didn't know how to love myself. And that kind of set the foundation for every relationship that I had in life. So, whether it was with friendship groups, like I say, partners, or with family relationships too, they all teach you something about yourself. And unless you really kind of understand who you are, what makes you tick, what makes you feel loved, it's very hard for you to communicate that to someone else or to set boundaries to protect your sense of self or your self worth. So, a little bit of a more insight into me is I come from a home where there was addiction, abuse, and neglect. So, a lot of the work that I do is very much with your childhood and how you had all these impressions placed upon you, imprints. It's not about parent shame or blame, it's just about exploring what went on and what beliefs you formed or fears you created that you carried forward. You forgot about the memories, but there's still the stories that are running in your mind. And there's still the stories that are creating your reality today, that are creating your relationships. So I like to explore that with clients. I like to kind of take them back, explore the positive memories, not so much the negative all the time. I like to have a bit of fun with it. But that's kind of why I became so passionate, because I discovered that this was a part of me that was really acting as a barrier to connection, a barrier to healthy love, to healthy relationships. And so I discovered that these patterns were the key to change, the key to having that life I desired, to having that love I desired, to having that relationship I desired with friends, with family, and romantic partners. So that's why I do what I do.
It's incredible that to hear that, and thank you for sharing so vulnerably about your past and what led you down this path. And it really sounds like, having gone down that journey yourself of maybe uncovering the positive and negative memories of your childhood and your experience, has allowed you to really maybe break through some of the patterns that you just weren't able to break through in your relationships. And so I guess having walked the walk, you can see how it's possible for those that are saying, this is just how I am, or I'm just doomed in relationships, how those self-beliefs can really shift.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of people, when they hear inner child, they don't really know what to think of it. But if you just think about it as, beliefs or experiences, or what you've exposed yourself to, or what you have been exposed to, and how that has caused you to form a certain perception of yourself, a perception of other people, or maybe even of the world around you. So it's just kind of understanding what meaning your mind has added as well, because our minds are meaning makers, and we always like to tell a story or make an assumption or create a certain expectation of someone else, and we don't communicate it, or we like to just get down into this hole where nothing's working for us, but we're not really taking action to help ourselves along the way. So
I'm smiling because I agree, because I also know very intimately. I'm like, that's definitely my vibe as well. Thanks, Katie. And Amanda, can you tell us a little bit about you and your journey, and what led you to becoming a couples counselor?
Yeah. And I think, adding on to what Katie said, sort of comes to something that I did learn early on. It's something that we all have in common. We are wired for connection. And from a young age, I was quite fascinated around the dynamics in my family. But we didn't really talk about emotions. So I became very fascinated with these feelings and, things that were going on inside me, but didn't really learn how to express them. or how to receive them from other people. And then that playing out in my adult relationships as well, and learning how hard it is to be vulnerable, and how hard it is to actually maintain a successful relationship and have your needs met in a relationship. And then I thought, well, why aren't we taught how to do this? So I think that's why I got into this work, because I'm astounded that it's something we all experience, but we're not shown how to do it, except from maybe those early childhood experiences and history of our own relationships.
It's interesting that we, don't really learn about how to deal with our emotions and our relationships at school. You know, you would think that this is foundational, fundamental things that really should be a part of the curriculum, and if our and maybe even offered to our parents to help us to adjust to the very confusing landscape that relationships can be as we're growing up, because they do cause us quite a bit of a pain sometimes when there are relationship ruptures and breakdowns, or we feel that are disconnected from those that are around us. So both of you have kind of spoken about, the importance of childhood experiences or past experiences or difficult and positive experiences in how they form our beliefs about the world. But then how does that form the beliefs that we have, or the expectations that we might have in relationships? What are people coming to therapy about? What are like realistic expectations in a relationship? Because I'm sure we all come in with our view of how relationships should be, and then they kind of bump up against other people's expectations, and that's where we find the conflict. I sing in the therapy room, and how do we get to a place where we can sort of understand how to look at the expectations that we're having in relationship, and maybe assess them in a bit more of an objective way?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite exciting, that topic, because people are coming to therapy at the moment, younger couples as well, and younger people saying, I don't know how to do relationships, wanting to do that preventative work. And what should I expect? What shouldn't I expect from a relationship? And at the moment, I think we really have so many expectations on our partner that, historically we got from a village or a community and many other people that were around us. So there is a lot of pressure on having that from one other person. I think that belief system really sets us up to fail in our connections and in our marriages or relationships. And we do have that research now, that people that are socially networked, people that are connected and know how to resourcefully get their needs met elsewhere, as well as from their partner, they actually do better in their marriages, in their relationships.
So there's this societal and evolutionary perspective where we may we are in the past, lived in communities where there was, greater perhaps access to people that we had more connected relationships with. So I guess what you're seeing is a reflection of how we may, be living with one or two or three people in a house. I mean, a lot of people, there's a trend, I think, of people actually living alone these days, and people being so busy with work and all the other expectations that they have upon themselves that they're not actually able to get their needs met, not only from a wide range of people, but I feel like there's some missing link around like being taught about how to meet maybe some of our needs ourselves, or even recognize that we even have needs. Because there's times, if you've been in a family dynamic where maybe talking about emotions and all of that and your needs weren't met, then maybe you learn not to actually even have needs at all. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I was like, who's going in? I do think, a lot of the time I hear from clients or from people in my circle, and even in regards to myself, it was only in recent years that I actually understood that I'm a human being and actually I have needs too. So especially for the women, I think there's a lot of this belief that you have to be overgiving or of service to everyone around you. And it's just a deeply ingrained belief. You know, if you think about the family structures that you were exposed to, especially when it comes to our parents or grandparents and beyond, it's very much you see women being of service within the home. And so that's kind of a dynamic that is imprinted in you a lot of the time. But when it comes to, you know, your needs in general, you know, how do you meet your needs? What are your needs would be my question for anyone on the call today. And to really just kind of sit with that. You know, what are your daily needs? Are you expecting your partner to meet all of your needs? Do you really believe that's a fair expectation? You know, if you're able to kind of take things into your own hands and understand that you are the source of your happiness, the source of feeling loved, the source of feeling at peace, you can really kind of understand how to make yourself feel that way or how to meet those needs by yourself first. And then understand that sometimes your partner can help out, or sometimes a family member can help out, or sometimes a friend can help out. You know, just to take, for example, the need for connection. You know, everyone has a need for connection. If you're to think about how you can meet that through a variety of ways, you know, by connecting to yourself, sometimes it's through journaling, sometimes it's watching your favorite movie and just being by yourself. Sometimes you might have a connection to your partner, and that's through, you know, doing an activity together. Maybe it's to the community. It's by doing an act of kindness, joining a club. You know, think about how you can meet one need through different ways, is what I'm trying to get at here. But if you're to think about, you know, whether you believe other people are there to meet your needs only and that's how it is, just maybe become curious as to where that belief came from. You know, where did you learn that it's up to other people to meet your needs? Or where did you learn that it's you don't have any needs as a person? You know, where does that lesson come from?
So I guess what you're saying is that, you know, we can consciously or unconsciously, you know, recreate or reenact also situations from our past where we may have seen in our family home certain dynamics that played out around roles and responsibilities, where we thought, okay, well, in the real world, that's like what I should expect, when it could be somewhat detrimental to our relationship when those needs are maybe or expectations that we have on ourselves aren't really realistic. I think it's also important to note that sometimes in trying to discover what our needs are, you know, if people have tried to go down that path, sometimes picking our needs, you know, off a list can be really difficult because we're not actually kind of connected to what we actually really need in a felt sense and connected to our past experience. So sometimes with clients, the pathway to understanding what their needs are is like you both have said, to really understand what needs weren't met in those younger years, and to also realize that those points can be sort of trigger points sometimes when those needs aren't being met in a relationship. You could be like, whoa, that's so, I can't believe that this is happening, and, you know, have a huge reaction to it as well. So it really, you know, I think sometimes people can feel that it is intimidating to actually go on the pathway to discover what their needs are. And I think we can absolutely normalize that. I'd like you guys to also speak about some of the, you know, the expectations, even for singles that might be watching tonight. There is this, you know, sometimes the concept of the one, or the right woman, or, you know, like someone's going to come and sweep me off my feet. You know, there's the archetype of the damsel in distress. Like, do you guys have any comments about, you know, about some of these beliefs, I guess, or expectations that we might have as single people?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I heard something the other day. What was it? Do we want a love story or do we want a life story? So knowing what you're looking for, but we were sort of, fairy tales haven't really helped us out very much at all in this, thinking that there's one person that's going to sweep us off our feet and be our everything. And that goes back to what we talked about around that pressure that's on relationships at the moment. But yeah, it's connecting with what those needs are, what you were just saying, and then being able to ask for it in a relationship is scary. So we can often just want to be swept up in that, those big gestures, but it's the big gestures aren't what's going to create love and long-lasting love. It's actually those small moments of connection where you turn up vulnerably to your partner and they can hold you in that space and accept you and be gentle with you for who you are.
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess my approach, if I was to think of it from a single on the dating scene, it's very easy to kind of get caught up in this ideal partner or ideal person. And you have all these, you know, beliefs or narratives or stories in your mind about how this person is going to show up. And you can get so caught up in those stories that you fail to see the reality of the person in front of you. So there's a thing called confirmation bias. So if you're very much, you know, headstrong on what you believe about a person and too much focused on all these ticks that you need to have, what I will say is you can fail to see the humanness in someone else. And it's kind of like turning inwards and really asking yourself, what is it that you are looking for? You know, what are you really focused on here? So I guess a quick tip when you are dating is to try and be present, to maybe bring awareness to your breath and not be too future focused or overthinking what you're doing, but be yourself. Because if you can show up as yourself, it's giving the other person an opportunity to accept you for you. And if that's the kind of a relationship that you want, then don't filter yourself. You know, just be yourself and see what comes into your life or who stays in your life. Folds. But I guess, you know, going back to the whole fantasy, for the men, it might play out as, you know, being the hero and finding the woman that's going to be in a state of distress, that's going to be quote unquote helpless or needing you. And so it kind of creates that potential for codependency. You know, I need her to need me, and she's like, I need him to need me. Or if it's, you know, same-sex couples, it can play it in the same way as well. So it's really just about having a reality check, you know, making sure that you're going in with clarity of what you want. Are you wanting a relationship or are you needing it? You know, what's motivating your decision to date? Is it fear or is it desire?
I'm loving this. Sorry, I'm getting so much out of this myself. I there's so many questions that I want to ask, because it sounds like I think about when I was looking for a relationship and I had my list of things, and in some ways it was good, but in some ways it really got in the way, because what I didn't realize at the time was that I had one need in a relationship that was going to kind of overtake all of them. And that was the need for safety. So everything sort of went out the door when I realized that all I really needed, like predominantly, was to feel safe in my relationship, where I could be myself and work through my stuff in it and go on that path. So it sounds like, you know, it is a really interesting conversation about the purpose of relationships, because there's a, you know, purpose of relationship to make you feel good about yourself, to lift you up, to provide you with endless support and guidance and all of that stuff. Or is there something that maybe you might be able to kind of elaborate on in terms of what you see as the purpose of relationships? Because sometimes I think the purpose of relationships is get my buttons pushed and then to figure out why my buttons got pushed and to heal from some stuff that I haven't, you know, really faced yet. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a therapist and I've done a lot of therapy I just feel like everything's leading me back to some type of healing and recognition. But I'm interested from your point of view around what you feel like, someone said, what are realistic expectations to have in a relationship? What can I kind of realistically think about when what is the purpose for me? Because if I'm not getting that right, it's like kind of going shopping for a mango tree, getting a banana tree and wondering why you're not getting mangoes.
Yeah. And even more confusing at the moment, isn't it, with the online dating option, where there's this illusion of endless people that we could have a relationship with. But in terms of the purpose, what comes up for me is, we are wired for connection, as we've talked about. We all have a desire to be needed and wanted and to be seen. I have couples all the time saying, my partner just doesn't understand me. My partner doesn't get me. I don't feel heard. There's this underlying theme all the time that we want to be noticed, we want to be wanted, and we want to be connected. Human beings are actually bonding mammals. And the exciting thing is we have science around this now that supports it. So we know what happens between two couples, two people or more, trying to get their needs met, trying to express what those deep longings are and those desires.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to go back to, I'm just looking at the questions in the chat box, but realistic expectations in a relationship, for examples for that, you have the right to feel respected, to feel safe, to have connection time with this other person, because you're in a relationship with them to share experiences with them, to be unconditionally accepted for who you are. That's another realistic expectation, but sometimes people can't accept us because they can't accept themselves. So it really comes back to the relationship that they have with themselves as well. So I guess, if you're to look at expectations, ask yourself, if your partner was to expect it of you, how would you feel? Try and reverse it around and see it from a different angle. I know I watched a clip on YouTube. It was by another dating coach, but it was kind of that, singles that go on to a first date and the woman expects the man to pay. And that's the expectation. And the reverse of that was the man expecting the woman to sleep with him. So it's kind of like, where are the kind of balanced viewpoints when you think of expectations? What's fair to the two people in the relationship?
Yeah.
I think you brought up a really good a point where you've said, I have a right to, feel my feelings in this relationship, or I have the right to change my mind. And I think what might be helpful for people who are listening is that there's actually a whole list called the Personal Bill of Rights that you can look up, and you can kind of go through them. And I think there's about 30 of them. They're also in my book as well. And you can actually go through them and say, is this something that I'm kind of comfortable with kind of expecting from, the world around me? And these actually are, you have the right to get mad at someone that you love, or to change your mind, or to change your opinion, or to have certain feelings. And I think that can give you a really nice objective way to sort of assess some of the expectations that you might have of yourself and those around you.
And I'd just add to that, Mary, if it's okay, I remember when I was dating, and don't be attached to outcomes too much. Like you said, Katie, be present in the moment, because sometimes we have these voices, these stories of, well, dating should lead to a relationship, dating should lead to marriage, or whatever it is that we're attached to from what we've learnt from our history and our story. But sometimes going in with that lens of not being attached to outcomes, we actually learn about ourselves relationally. So just turn up and be present, and this may be a friendship, this may be a romantic relationship, whatever it is, let's turn up and be present and learn something about ourselves.
I think I've often said to my clients who are entering into relationships or dating, that it does take a little while to get to know someone, that it's important to maybe, you might not get that vibe straight away, but it's sometimes nice to maybe go through something difficult together, maybe be a support, for another, and to see how you both handle a difficult situation. Because when it's good, it's good. Everyone's like, yay. But then when it's hard, you want to be able to maybe see how a person can hold space for you, which is allow you to have the feelings that you do without necessarily trying to fix or change them. I think that's my definition of holding space. So I think this conversation that we're having really relates to communication. And there's been some questions in the chat about, how can I communicate my needs to those around me? And it's sort of relating to boundaries. How do I express the boundaries that I have? And what happens when maybe someone is like, well, I don't think that's an appropriate boundary to have. And maybe we need to then have a look at, where that comes from and how to resolve that. Because it's not always like, yes, cool, those are your needs and these are your boundaries and I respect them. And it's, there can be tension, there can be conflict, there can be people triggering each other and really, my therapist likes to say, two people collapsing into their own wounds, where they, really can't see the situation very clearly and objectively, and have gone into emotional wounds and maybe acting as maybe like how a child would. So, on this very large topic of communication and boundaries, I mean, as therapists in this area, what's sticking out to mind to share with our audiences tonight around communication and boundaries?
I mean, I will let everyone know I used to be a yes woman, so I used to never be able to say no. And something that really helped me to kind of change the way that I show up was exploring, what I learned about no from a very young age, because no is such an important word, especially when it comes to your boundaries. So I think a lot of people might have be led to believe that, they were selfish or that they were rude or impolite if they were to say, no, sorry, I can't commit to that today. And they feel this kind of guilt that you're letting someone else down, that you're disappointing them. But I always like to say, people who mind don't matter. Those who matter don't mind, so really think about that when you are setting your boundaries. But in terms of communicating them, if someone feels a little bit of resistance, sometimes it might just be because they're feeling a little bit unsafe with this boundary being set. So if you think about when we set boundaries, it's to change something. So people kind of fear change and they don't like it because it means that it's not going to be routine anymore, or they have to show up in a different way, or you're showing up in a different way. So it's just about kind of relearning where everything falls and creating a new safety for everyone involved. But if someone is resistant, understand that that's for them to manage. What you can control is your boundary and how you're feeling, and really reflect on whether it's too rigid or too open. How are you feeling in your body? Is it like a full body yes or a full body no? And really pay attention to that feeling within you. You'll feel depleted if it's not really serving you, or you'll feel a little bit of anger or resentment, and you'll feel really energized, really happy, really positive if the boundary is working for you, and if it was really a full body yes or a full body.
So are you saying that sometimes boundaries can be, I wouldn't say bad, but sometimes we can use boundaries, they can be healthy types of boundaries that we can enforce that come from a place of maybe knowing what your needs are and having the courage to sort of communicate them. But are you saying that there is a place where boundaries kind of can be used as a weapon, or, as a way of maybe having some type of control in the relationship, maybe? Can you speak to that at all? Or is that a very touchy subject? that we do?
No, it's not touchy at all. I guess it's, what is the intention that is behind your boundary setting? So are you doing it to try and dictate to someone's life would be my kind of question. Are you doing it to try and change someone, to try and manipulate them into a behavior change or a thought change or a feeling change? Like, I always say bring it back to a win-win situation, or assess your values and your goals or your time and energy and the capacity to which you can commit to things. There's no shame in saying, hey, I really appreciate the offer, but right now I'm spreading myself thin. I would love to catch up with you another time. Or, hey, I just can't commit to that right now, but it's not a you thing, it's a me thing. So don't worry about it, or don't take it personally. It's about open communication, because we all have our own insecurities at times that can be triggered. Like, why have they said no to me? Is it me? Did I do something wrong? Are they rejecting me? And it's kind of like, where is that really coming from? So in terms of the control thing, Mary, it depends on the situation and the relationship and the people involved, and the intention behind the boundary setting.
Yeah.
Amanda.
I think there's so many things popping up as you're talking. I think also a boundaries, can also be a coping mechanism. When we've been triggered in the relationship or something's uncomfortable for us, we can sort of have a reaction to it and put up a boundary, say no, or push someone away because we're not feeling safe with what's happening. So it might be that we say to our partner, no, I'm not comfortable doing that, or we might criticize them, or we might push them away, but it's a reaction from a very painful place, from a primary emotion, from a more vulnerable emotion that it's brought up for us. So I think being curious about that within yourself, and I love what you said, Katie, just in terms of taking responsibility for how I show up here, but our partner can also notice that and be curious about that and say, I can see you're not okay. What's happening for you? What do you need from me right now? Because it may not be how it appears. It might be an underlying fear.
Can you also tell us a little bit about emotionally focused therapy, Amanda? This is something that you use quite a lot in, in the room with couples. What is it? How can it help couples navigate conflict, conversations, attuning to each other? Because I think it's so nice to understand sometimes the framework in which people may be walking into and understanding how they can develop authentic relationships.
Yeah. So I guess emotionally focused therapy, for everyone listening, EFT, it's based on bonding science. So we have the beauty of some evidence-based research and clinical trials, so that we know now what happens between two people that are trying to communicate their needs and longings. And sometimes it doesn't land so well for the other person. And we know now that couples, it's really normal for them to pick up negative conflict cycles. And when that happens, and often come into therapy to get help with that, is we're reacting from some really painful emotions that are underneath. So what we do in emotionally focused therapy is really tune into those emotions in the room. And it might be something for clients that they've never actually done before. I've never been shown how to tune into my inner world, and be able to name that, be able to understand what that need is and have that deeper understanding of the self. But then being able to ask for it as well in a relationship can be really scary. This brings up vulnerability. Relationships ask us to be really vulnerable. And a lot of us, that's really scary to do.
So I guess so, sorry to interrupt, but, in terms of, this question that someone's asking in the chat, when you're asking people in the therapeutic, in the room to attune to themselves, and maybe one of them is experiencing depression, whether they are conscious of it or not. Is that something that, you know, emotionally focused therapy and couples therapy is good for? Or would you suggest that that person maybe has to have their own therapist and they're doing separate counseling, and then they may be coming to you for couples counseling? Like, how might that work?
Yeah, so a few different ways. I mean, individual therapy going in tandem with couples therapy can be really useful, and a great way to explore the self, but also explore how I turn up in this relationship. When there's, you know, some added mental health issues or trauma, things like that, it comes back to what you said earlier, Mary, that relationships can be a very healing space for a lot of these triggers and vulnerabilities or histories of trauma. Relationships can be very healing for that. So a lot of the time, couple therapy can be quite transforming for people and quite healing for people in that way.
I'm going to also try to answer a question that came up in a chat around, I don't know where it is now, but I think it was around, you know, navigating relationships, you know, when you've had kids. So this is a bit of a, you know, left of field sort of question, but I think it's nice to really listen to our community and in the time that we have, answer as many questions that we can. So Katie or Amanda, what are you seeing in the space of those who are parents, and you know, how are you helping them navigate their relationships?
Yeah, one thing I really love to say to couples when they come in and they're trying to navigate a relationship and get their needs met, and they've got young children, you're in the trenches. That is the hardest part of your journey in a relationship. And often when we pick up these negative conflict cycles because we don't have the time to really turn up or turn to our partner and lean into the relationship, we're exhausted. This is a crucial time for a couple and for a relationship where we can actually do damage to our bond and attachment by, you know, being reactive because we're tired, things like that. But a lot of sort of, you know, validation and kindness to new parents, because it is tough, you know, having to juggle all of that together.
I guess if I was to think of it this way, you know, in a family, there are two people and a child or multiple children. And it really comes back to, you know, a balance of roles and responsibilities and feeling safe to communicate with your partner about what needs to change if you feel like you're reaching burnout or feeling like you're letting go of a part of your identity that is actually really important to you. You know, so maybe it's having a bit of a day on, day off schedule too. So maybe one day you can have your self-care practice in the morning and the next day your partner can have it. So it's about how can you both have that time to nurture the relationship with yourself, but also be able to manage the other people or other kids in your life in a way that feels rewarding and not so much kind of stressful and negative and pressurized and, you know, all those emotions that would come with being a parent. So if I was to look at Nicole's question, how do you overcome this pressure to date when people around you are getting married and having kids? You know, society creates expectations on couples, on singles, on everyone basically to show up in a certain way, to have all these life goals, you know, but your life goals are your life goals. They're not society's. It's not for society to tell you what to do or achieve by a certain age. So it's kind of turning inwards in that regard. You know, your friends around you or people around you have a different life path to you. And just because they're happy getting married or happy having kids or getting engaged, it doesn't mean that you not doing those things is a reflection of your worth or your value. You know, your goal might be going off traveling. You know, that's a different goal in life. That's something that deserves kind of recognition. So it's about bringing it back to you. What's important to you? You know, what would you like to do with your time and energy in life, rather than focusing on other people and what they're doing with their lives? You're wasting that energy. Bring it back. Think of how much energy would be available to you if you actually let go of that thought pattern or that focus and started putting it into you and your life.
Mm. Just to wrap, you know, a bit of a conversation that's been open around how to be in relationship and also have family and kids and navigate that space. You know, I think I read something today in The Guardian where it was like, don't wait till too late to get support as well, because I think this is going to go across, you know, a lot of the questions that you guys might be asked today. And I've really noticed that there's been a shift, I think, in how we might manage things when they go wrong. There's a more, you know, people are a bit more open about having a therapist, going to therapy, talking about therapy. I would say, you know, a big thing is like, just don't wait till shit completely hits the fan and you're rock bottom, because it's so hard to get from that place to build up again. That sometimes when we start to just recognize that there are issues in our either self-concept, way we relate to ourselves, relate to others, our partners, I would say that sort of nipping it in the bud and realizing that it's okay, you know, to be able to seek support and help, that we do actually really need each other. I think although there is a trend of people being okay with, you know, going into therapy these days, there is in our, you know, type of society a very individualistic approach to life itself. And it's like, I've got to like get my shit together and do everything myself and be very independent and figure it all out. But when we're talking about a particularly relationship stuff that we're having difficulties with, they come from relational issues often from our past. And it's often that we need relationships, either with therapists or people that we love, or, you know, that are close to us, that can help us heal from them. So I think a really interesting question that's come up that is around, you know, how do you know that you've healed from your previous relationships? And this is going to go in tandem with, you know, how do we open our hearts in relationships? So Amanda, do you have anything to say around how, you know, I'm guessing so many people relate, you know, people are coming to see you and they had all this hope and expectation for their relationships, and they get to a place where maybe they're not even arguing about really difficult big things, but it's just more how they're arguing, and like they're over time they're sort of seeing their partner in like in a certain way, and they're not really kind of cutting through to, you know, to the heart of who they really are.
That's right. I mean, couples coming in, if we're talking about conflict, you know, and they've picked up that negative cycle at some point, like in a stressful event, or, you know, maybe they've always fought that way, maybe they've always communicated that way. What it does is it erodes the bond and attachment that you develop with another human being. So it chips away at that safety. So the longer you leave it, the longer you let that cycle be in charge of your dynamic and how you express your needs and longings, the more damage it does. So we don't want it to get to a point, I always say, never leave it too late. We don't want it to get to a point where it's eroded that bond and someone detaches emotionally from the relationship and leaves it. Okay. And the longer you leave it, I guess there's more to heal before we can transform how you do conflict. We've got to heal some of that damage first. You know, we've got to really look after those emotional wounds that can get created by us throwing spears at each other.
So do you have to teach people how to say sorry and how to forgive each other in relationships? Because I imagine it's pretty hard. I mean, in my relationship history, I'm like, I never want to admit that I'm wrong. You know, I'm just like, buckle down. You know?
And sitting with that emotion and learning about yourself. What comes up for you when you're asked to apologize to someone? It might be shame. It might be something else. You know, being curious about what's happening within us is the key to sort of be able to know what the feeling is and be able to express it.
So I guess it means sometimes having to lean into something that is quite uncomfortable, like shame or guilt or feeling not good enough, because it's the avoidance of, you know, maybe saying sorry that gets us to sort of protects us from having to explore those deeper, darker emotions.
That's right. Yeah. So those primary emotions, those more vulnerable ones, human beings are very clever at staying away from them. Okay, I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to shut down, or I'm going to change the topic, or I'm going to suddenly go quiet. And when I go quiet, that may trigger my partner, because when I go quiet, they feel like they're not important. Okay, and they might then get triggered and behave in a certain way to bring you back to be close to them. Okay, because that's what we're after. We're after that closeness, you know, but we can behave in a way in relationship that really creates distance. So this is the learning that we should have at school, as we said. You know, this is what we need to be taught, because there is a healthy way to do conflict. We're going to have conflict. We're going to step on each other's toes. That's okay. It's how we do it that can be really harmful.
Something that's been really helpful for me in my relationship is to say, what that brought up for me was this, so that I can express the emotions that I have without necessarily projecting them onto my partner. So I might be able to be angry, but not necessarily have that anger directed at my partner, even though I'm like, you were the cause of that anger. It's you know, the time to separate my feelings about you are the cause of this emotion coming up to me, to be able to say in the moment, or maybe a couple of days after, sometimes it takes me a little while to recognize where this is really coming from, and be able to come back into the relationship and say, what that brought up for me was that I felt really alone because this happened to me in my past experience, and that's what's been brought up for me. And I found that extremely powerful, because it kind of dissolves the sort of like tennis match, you know, like people are scoring points sort of thing. And it just sort of really melts the emotion down to a place where I can be seen, I guess, maybe for having a wound and in my vulnerability. And there seems to be a lot more compassion and understanding. It stops the back and forth fighting quite a lot when I'm able to say, this is what it has brought up for me. And it actually, you've brought, like, the situation's brought it up for me, but it's really not about you. Because
you know, the anger is useful. The anger is telling you that something's not right here. It sets off your alarm system that I don't feel safe, and it's being curious about that. What's underneath it? Is it a fear? Is it something from the past? You know, what is it triggering underneath that? But often when we're caught in a conflict cycle, we express that anger before we really we sit with and discover what's underneath it. And if we express that secondary emotion, so that anger, frustration, annoyance, that creates distance with human beings. But if we go to our partner and say, I feel really sad, I felt really alone when you were late home, instead of criticizing them. If you express those primary emotions, those raw ones, those vulnerabilities, your partner's going to move closer to you, because you have a bond and attachment. So a much nicer way, a much more peaceful way to communicate how we're feeling.
One definitely that takes some practice and self-awareness to develop. Absolutely. Because initially there is a lot of artillery in relationships where it's like all guns blazing, until we realize that no one's really getting anywhere when you know, there's just pot shots happening. Katie.
I was like, oh, I can't get anything in. I'm like, the screen. I was like, I suppose, you know, again, there's a few questions that go back to the childhood trauma. If you think about, you know, what you learned about conflict or handling pain within relationships, you know, did you have an experience with mom or dad where maybe you asked for a chocolate bar or you wanted something and an angry outburst happened, and that's created a fear of, if I speak up and communicate, this person's going to explode on me, or it's not safe to open up about my desires. And that's not, parent blame or shame, because your parents have patterns too, just like you. So it's really understanding that they're just doing the best that they could in those moments because that's what they knew or didn't know in terms of their own emotional experience. So something that can really help you in the heat of the moment is taking a breath, like not rushing into saying anything, or having a safety signal with your partner. It could be a word, or it could be simply communicating, hey, I'm recognizing that I'm a bit emotionally triggered right now. Can we talk about this at a time where we're both feeling safe to open up and to properly communicate and work towards a solution or a win-win situation? Because the last thing you want to do is create a really deep wound that's just kind of sitting there. You want to think about how can you navigate what's going on, but in a way that's not damaging the relationship, but rather bringing you closer together and helping you grow. Whether it's someone that you're casually dating or seriously with, there's no right time to do these things. It's about starting it when it comes up and addressing it when it comes up. And it's okay to come back around and say, let's talk about this in a day or 2 days when it suits the two of us and we're both calm amongst all the chaos.
Well, I imagine, for those that are kind of going through this journey of being able to find the right words and to create an atmosphere of safety while there are, tension points in a relationship. I feel as though, I can speak for myself that I often get it wrong, and I often shoot off a bomb before it's like, oh, and I'm sitting in a lot of regret afterwards. So there's been some, similar kind of questions in the chat, like around building a compassionate relationship with self. Like, as we're learning how to be in relationship with ourselves and others, how do we build that compassion for us, on our journey? Because it's pretty hard, we want to be seen as doing the right thing all the time, but I think there's a lot of humbling that comes through being in a relationship, because there's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of recognition of stuff that of your blind spots, and there are a lot of uncomfortable emotions that are to be felt. So Amanda, what would you say about, do you have any insight on building a compassionate relationship with self?
With self, yeah. Wow. I find that saying to people all the time, be kind to yourself. We have an emotion, and then we might have learnt to that goes straight to shame, or something like that, and really beat ourselves up about that place that we're sitting in. So always being kind to yourself around what's coming up, and being vulnerable is brave and it's hard. And I really think even giving it a go is very courageous. Even attempting a relationship with your own vulnerabilities is courageous. So really, I want to say, be kind to yourselves around that.
It sounds like being kind to yourself in your definition is related to allowing yourself to have those uncomfortable emotions, rather than suppressing them and letting them all be there, because it's natural and normal for us to have those emotions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the way you speak to yourself. So that inner critic, but it's kind of like, how can you bring out your inner coach or your inner best friend instead? So, a really helpful tip that can work and help you balance out that negativity bias is just, 2 columns on a sheet of paper, inner critic. What do you tend to say to yourself? Is it, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough, this isn't how I should look, creating pressure, creating self-hate. And then what would you say to your friend if you actually heard your friend saying those things to herself or himself out loud? Like, what would you say? You'd probably be really supportive and probably point out all the good things that your friend has going for them. So you need to learn how to do that to yourself. But because we grow up in society, and if you think about what you've exposed yourself to, everything teaches you that you need something else to be happy. You need something else to feel good enough. You need this to have the ideal family. You need this to have the ideal relationship. All of those stories again created. And it's kind of like, bring it back to you. You know, all you need is a nicer inner dialogue for you to feel a certain way in any moment in time. So whether that's more confident, more happy, more lovable, more deserving, it's just about what you're saying to yourself and kind of catching yourself, increasing your level of consciousness when you are talking to yourself, and really asking yourself why you are saying that. You know, is that something you can really believe about yourself? Where does that come from? Does it sound like someone? You know, oh, who's that someone?
Thank you. And on this, do you guys think it's important that, do you believe that you have to love yourself first before you can love someone else? And another question, how are you able to love others if you don't love yourself? I mean, pretty interesting questions, I think.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because part of me thinks, well, we don't have to be perfect. I think it's important to know we don't have to be perfect to start a relationship, because we learn about ourselves relationally. You know, we're wired for connection. Human beings learn about themselves relationally. Okay. But what we touched on a little bit before, I think about, well, we can't really be real and authentic in relationship unless we have done that with ourselves first. So being really curious about, what is it to be vulnerable being me? What is it to be real and authentic? What's important to me? And often when we do that work, you know, time and time again, I get told, well, that's when that person comes into your life and meets you where you're at. Yeah, because we just get a reflection of what we're working on within ourselves.
So would you say that you're sort of guiding people that may be listening to understand their true values, and that could help them, once they understand them, to be able to recognize when someone may have similar values to them as well?
Yeah, values are so important in a relationship, but it's that deeper understanding of self and being comfortable with yourself and being comfortable to grow and change, and then maybe attempt that in a relationship as well. But maintaining that selfhood doesn't stop because you start a relationship. I think sometimes we think that it's one or the other. And that's when we can get into those habits that you were talking about, Katie, of self-sacrificing or turning up and giving too much, or you'll get someone over-functioning or under-functioning to keep a relationship going. But if we're constantly checking in with self, whether we are single or whether we're in a relationship or whether we're dating, that's kind of our compass.
I just imagine, as we've been growing up and in our society, that our point of reference often isn't ourselves and our own wisdom, that we haven't actually been taught to be able to listen within and to be able to get a sense of what feels right for us in our bodies intuitively, that our point of reference often is others. And so there, when it comes to sort of doing some of the work, self-work, to be able to come into relationships in a healthy way, there is so much of that self-discovery that needs to take place. Katie, do you think that you need to love yourself before you get into a relationship, and how can you love someone if you don't?
When I think about self-love, I think more about self-acceptance. So kind of what you need to accept within yourself first. You know, are you not really showing love towards certain flaws or weaknesses? And if so, how can you kind of work on those areas of either physical self, emotional self, or mental self, so that when you do meet someone, or if you are in a relationship with someone, you don't feel like you have to hide them, because you accept them. And if you accept them, that means someone else is, you know, able to accept them too. And if they don't, that equally teaches you something about the relationship that they have with themselves, you know? So if you think about, again, where you learn to accept yourself, you know, people around you, how they relate to themselves, how they relate to other people, is all communicating a message to you. So it really comes back to this inner child, you know, what experiences you went through that taught you not to accept yourself. If I was to pull an experience of mine, you know, it's friendship groups. You know, I was rejected in some friendship groups. And it's kind of like how that changes your behavior, how that changes the way you see yourself. And you always kind of hold on to that pain unless you really explore it and kind of tease it apart and understand that if it was an experience, you know, in your earlier years, whether that's teens or even younger again, your mind isn't really logical thinking, it's adding meaning, and it's, again, something that you didn't know how to handle at the time. But now as an adult, you can really nurture that child within and really show up for, you know, the person that you needed back then. And really kind of take all those lessons in, take that love in, take that nurturing in. You're not supposed to be perfect, as Amanda said. Chasing perfection is really going to, you know, lead you down a route that the goalpost is going to always be moving. There's always going to be something else that you're trying to perfect. And if you're trying to perfect yourself, be mindful, because that might bleed into your relationships. I know it definitely bled into mine at one point. So I guess self-love is more about understanding yourself, holding space for yourself, not shaming yourself, not filtering yourself, allowing you to have that human experience. And if you're showing up in that way, you also allow space. You know, so if you're going through it with someone, but it's also really nourishing, and it helps you expand into the best possible self that you could be.
There are so many interesting questions that are coming up in the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you different questions. So, you know, we're going to be playing a little game of tennis, but I think I would really love for us to be able to get through some of these questions. We have a question about codependency. I mean, people might even want to know what codependency is. Amanda, I'm going to ask you about codependency. And how do we recognize that we're codependent? And then how might you help people navigate that if you recognize that that's coming up in a relationship? Because I imagine some people don't even know, or couples don't even know that they're codependent. Like, what?
Yeah, it's a complicated one. I think it's one of Katie's favorite topics.
Oh, should we switch?
Yeah, because it's interesting, because we talk about this codependency and what comes up, and recognizing those signals of you know, when it's turning up in relationship for us. But there's also interdependence, and there's the difference between the two, I think, is worth exploring, because interdependence is, sometimes we think about codependence and it makes us fearful to turn up in relationship and ask for our needs to be met, whereas interdependence is actually the superpower for a relationship. It's actually the superpower for attachment and bonding, being able to turn up, show vulnerability to your partner and say, this is what's going on for me, and then to have emotional responsiveness at the other end. So I think it's a really important point. We talk a lot about codependency, and I think it creates some fear for people about getting into relationships in the first place. I can see you smiling, Katie. I'm not sure if you agree with me.
I mean, my my beliefs are we are very much exposed to codependency in society. It's not necessarily a relationship problem between one person and another. It's very much a societal thing. There's a lot of things that creates dependency. But if you're to think about codependency, it's not actually really defined. I've read so much on it and I'm like, which explanation do I go with? But the easiest way to think about it is, you know, you get into a relationship with someone, maybe you leave go of your identity, extra hobbies or activities. And so you focus solely on this one person. If you're of a codependent nature, maybe your behaviors are you neglecting your own needs while prioritizing someone else's needs. And that's kind of how the resentment tends to build in a relationship, because you're of the belief that you don't have needs and you're giving yourself away and being of service to someone else. And then you're not communicating that you want all these things done. And so it starts to create the conflict. Similarly, the other side of that is, someone who maybe grew up in a home where they were used to having all their needs met. They never really learned about being self-sufficient or being independent. And so they get into a relationship. And sometimes the reference I kind of like to use is, how the partner shifts into a parental role. So the dynamic shifts. It's not really an adult, it's an adult child. So you have the child who expects the other person, who's the parent, to meet all the needs. And this is how the dynamic kind of feels. It doesn't really feel like a partnership, like a balance. It feels more like there's one person giving too much and another person taking too much, or you have two givers as well. So two people who are just giving, like maybe they are a bit indecisive. No, what do you want to do? No, what do you want to do? And there's always that kind of unknown. There's no real connection being built. There's no real understanding of what it means to have that balanced relationship. So I think of it as, in terms of your inner child, and I said this on a live with Mary, you're abandoning your inner child, or you're expecting someone else to abandon their inner child to take care of your inner child. So if you're to think about, what's going to make you feel good in a relationship, paint that picture for yourself and your partner or the person that you're dating. Have that conversation. Maybe work on the relationship that you have with yourself. So understand that you're the source. Again, you can meet every single one of your needs as an adult. The only time you can't is when you are a child, because you're dependent on a caregiver. So it's okay to ask for a need to be met from your partner, but not to be depending on them to be the only way that you can meet a need. That's kind of my take on codependency.
Awesome. Amanda, could I ask you about how you help couples navigate infidelity in a relationship?
Yeah, we touched on forgiveness before, and I think something that's important to say about forgiveness when we're talking about betrayal or infidelity with a couple is forgiveness isn't a switch. I think society's kind of taught us that it's a choice. We're going to choose the relationship and we're going to forgive, and that happens. But it's not a switch. It's a healing process that we have to go through to recover from infidelity or betrayal. So in terms of how we work with couples in that way is you both have to turn up, I guess, and be willing to repair the relationship. Anything outside of that needs to have been finished or stopped. So it's we're both turning up and we want to fix this. Now, there's lots of reasons why infidelity happen. It can be needs not met in the relationship. It can be something within that person that's how they've learned to soothe themselves and cope when they don't feel safe. Okay, or they mightn't be looking for another person. They might be looking for a different version of themselves. There's lots of different reasons why infidelity happens. And it isn't black and white. It's not once a cheater, always a cheater, or, you can't forgive him, he'll do it again, or anything like that. It's a process of healing we can go through, and, we can recover from infidelity. Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's important for people to know, because I think often people do see infidelity as very black and white. But I mean, you're basically on the coalface, really seeing couples being able to heal and potentially even deepen after betrayal or infidelity. So I think that's actually really, really interesting and inspiring in a way for some people who are just, that's it.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful work working with betrayal, and really brave work for people to come in and do that. So we need to get to a point where the impact and the pain that betrayal causes is really understood by the person who did the betrayal. Okay. And then we discover together the why. How did this happen? How do we know that it's not going to happen again? And that can take some time to really go through that process. But I do find that people that really love and care for their partner, and they're connected to their partner and they're attached to them, that if you put the work in, they always say we feel closer after going through this process than we did before the infidelity happened or before the betrayal happened. And that's a process for infidelity, but it's also a process for small betrayals. We can create wounds in our partners unintentionally, and they're very painful.
Thank you for sharing that. Katie, this came from a question that I was asked, outside of this chat, but for people that are single, how do you connect and find someone during this pandemic? I feel like I struggle to build relationships or date. Do you have any 3 hot tips for those who are finding it difficult during these times to be able to get out there?
I mean, obviously there's a lot of fears created. We've been in lockdown all through last year. It's been a lot of online connection, and it's wondering if that online connection is really an authentic connection. But I guess when you are approaching the dating scene, I see this quite common is, focusing on how to make the other person happy. So what's going to make them happy rather than focusing on what is going to make you happy. It's kind of like a little mindset shift that needs to happen. If you believe that you struggle to create connections, that in itself is quite limiting to you. What do you need to kind of say to yourself to kind of open yourself up a bit to having that connection with someone else? So even saying, while I've had challenges in the past, I'm open to new experiences. And that whole kind of inner dialogue, again, can really change how you feel when you're approaching the dating scene. It's obviously going to be daunting when you're going out there. It's kind of like, oh my God, am I going to be good enough? Are they going to like me? And it's like all these anxious thoughts coming up. But bring yourself back to the present, ask yourself, if you want a meaningful relationship or meaningful connection, what questions do you need to ask? What do you want to find out about them? You can do that by finding out about yourself. What makes you feel good? What makes you feel nourished in a relationship? How do you like to be shown love? And really get curious on that and kind of paint the picture in regards to the relationship with yourself. Because if you know that, then you can approach the relationship with someone else with elements of curiosity. What makes you feel good? What do you like to do in your free time? What do you see yourself doing in the next couple of weeks or couple of months in terms of adventure or creativity? Think about what's going to create that deeper connection rather than keeping it very surface level, which can often be, what do you do for work? What are you doing tomorrow? What's your favorite drink? We kind of want to deepen the connection, and you deepen the connection with someone else by deepening the connection with yourself. But fears are natural. So be compassionate to yourself. I know when I was on the dating scene, I was like, oh shit. I have no idea what to do.
there's always going to be barriers, right? Whether it's the pandemic or whether it's online dating or, whatever it is, I think we can create many, many obstacles for ourselves. And what I'm sort of getting from what you're saying is that the importance of focusing on positive as well, and being able to, just look within to why we might be able to, why we might be able to creating those obstacles ourselves. I'm trying to squish in all these questions in the last 10 minutes. Amanda, tips if you're dating someone who's scared of commitment and you're ready for a relationship. I mean, you might see that in couples where someone's like a bit, and the other one's, moving forward. The other one seems to be moving back a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to be honest, if you've got one who's ready for commitment and one that's a little bit, scared about commitment, that's probably a pretty good match. You can help each other out there. But I think it's about being curious. What happens for you when you think about a relationship or you think about commitment? That can be a really triggering word for people. What's coming up? You can ask your partner and be really curious about what happens for you. If you had to name the emotion, what is it? It might be some underlying fear, or I don't want to be like my mother, and if I commit to a relationship, that leads to that, and that leads to that. It could be anything. So I think the key is to be curious and ask those questions of each other and really learn how to not just hear it, but listen, and explore what's happening, what comes up for you with the word commitment.
Huge.
Huge, because they may not even know. You might know. You just have this pattern of pushing people away in relationships, and then suddenly you meet that person that you really want to turn up for and be vulnerable and commit to, and that's when it's actually all going to come up for you. That's when it's going to unravel, and that's when you're going to have to do the work to find out what's going on there. Yeah.
I mean, this is a very similar question. How do you navigate a relationship where your partner switches between hot and cold? That's, I mean, that could also be seen as someone who's maybe a bit afraid of commitment. But, Katie, do you have like a bit of a slant on that as well?
I'm trying to approach this with a bit of a helicopter view rather than going straight down into my gut instinct. When someone's being hot and cold, it really depends on around what they are being hot and cold over. So if you think about that behavior in itself, is it that they don't want to talk about something, they don't want to commit to something? And if so, what is it? How can you create an element of safety? Sometimes by you showing up in a certain way, it allows your partner to show up in that way too. So kind of like a little bit of a mirror. Same goes with expressing emotions. If one partner is feeling emotionally overwhelmed, if you can find your calm and keep your cool, it'll often help your partner to regulate their emotions, because they won't feel like things are kind of getting more heated and hot and heavy, but rather kind of like, oh, wait, it's okay. This is just my fight or flight response going off. I can bring myself down because my partner is showing me this kind of safety signal rather than this, perceived threat. But the hot and cold behavior, if it's to avoid hurting themselves, maybe becoming curious as to, what is coming up for them. What are they afraid is going to hurt them deep down? It could be connected to familial or past relationships, and it's just kind of trying to be compassionate towards that wound so that there's not further wounding done. Again, this comes back to yourself and your capacity to hold space for your own wounds. When it comes to being able to hold space for your partner's wounds, for the hot cold behavior.
I think it's probably also important not to be your partner's therapist as well. And been there. It's very easy role for men and women to fall into. So again, seeking that outside support. I have a really, I don't know, this contentious maybe a question, but do you guys have red flags that you think are just no-nos in relationships while dating, or is is there gray in a lot of things? Because we've talked about infidelity and codependency, and you guys are pretty good. You guys seem to have solutions for nearly everything, and that there may be opportunities to sort of deepen and work on things, but are there just straight out relationship red flags, or is this just something that we can use to like maybe not go deeper?
My instinct is telling me any element of secrecy is the biggest red flag. So someone trying to hide a part of their life from you. So whether that's showing up, in phone behaviors, you know, not really being kind of protective, like not wanting to have the screen open. They're kind of big warning signs from my own experiences and from what I hear from people quite often, is that not wanting to share their life with you, not wanting to have you involved, whether that's inviting you out the odd time with friends, they don't do it, or with work colleagues, they don't do it. They're kind of red flags, in my opinion, because if someone's really committed to you, they're going to want you in their life. They're going to want to involve you in any aspect of their life. There's going to be no kind of like, I can't do this because I'm going out with work friends. Sorry, you're not invited. You know, it's okay. Now it's okay for them to go out the odd time, you know, with their nights out and their friendship groups. But if you're never asked at all, that is a little bit of a warning sign that maybe there is something motivating that behavior.
It's just a tough one, because that presentation can also be someone who isn't ready for commitment. But you're right, if it's setting off those alarms within you, I'd say listen to your gut, because red flags are different for everybody. But or is that behavior about control? So when there's a behavior about that's more about control, or shutting you down or keeping you small, that's a red flag.
Yeah, I guess bringing it back to that, you know, someone who's trying to change you, but not maybe in the best way. So they're kind of, like Amanda said, making you feel small. So taking your joy away, taking your spark away, making you feel like you're more of a shell of a person, walking around on eggshells because you're afraid that you're going to set them off at any moment, or that if you were to do something for yourself, that it's going to be met with some sort of a negative response from them. Communication is key. You know, curiosity in those moments. Why is it happening? What's going on? How can we ensure that this isn't going to be repeating constantly? Or what do I need to communicate so that I'm feeling safe, supported in the relationship?
Well, Katie and Amanda, I wish I had you guys as my two ladies on my shoulders as I navigated all my relationships in my life, because, man, they would have caused me a lot less pain to have you guys in my life. But now I am very grateful that you guys are part of the Indigo Project family, and that our community can come and see you and get all the wisdom. I think today we have covered so much ground in so little time. I'm so grateful for both of you for being so open, vulnerable, real. Oh, it was just, you know, it was just incredible. And I can speak for our audiences and those that watch this recording afterwards that it was really quite incredible. And I know, Amanda, that you've said maybe we should do a regular Q&A. You know, if this is something that you guys want from us, please let us know, because we want to be able to give you guys the information that you need to navigate your life in the way that is connected and authentic and grounded and beautiful and creative. So we have an idea of what we'd love to give, but you guys are the best ones to be able to tell us what you need, what information you need, what tips, what strategies, what topics you want to talk about. I know relationships is huge, and I think that we could have spoken forever about it, but maybe there is part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, who knows? And so we're going to leave that there. To all our audience that's been watching, you know, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's your time is precious, and you know it takes a lot sometimes to sit and focus and concentrate. Thank you, ladies, for your time. You guys know that how to contact us if you're looking to connect with these incredible practitioners. And this is not the last session that we have. This is just the beginning. So next week we've got a session on trauma in the body, and then we've got a session on identity and motivation, and then we've got a session that sounds really morbid, but it's not. It's really beautiful. It's on death and new beginnings. We all have lots of deaths and transitions in our lives, so don't worry, we're not just going to be like talking about coffins and, you know, scary things and skeletons. It's really going to be about how to live your life in a way that is meaningful, which is really the basis of all the things that we're talking about. Again, I just wanted to thank everyone in the community for joining us today. It's like been a huge response, and we're so thrilled that we are still a part of your lives and that you still love us. And we're grateful that we can hold this space for you. So thank you so much. And we will see you guys at the next sessions, and hopefully more from Amanda and Katie soon too. So thank you, ladies, and thank you to our community.